Welcome everyone to our monthly webinar series for certified LGBT business enterprises, LGBTBE. We are delighted that you are able to join us today. My name is Brent Stewart, Manager of Supplier Diversity here at the NGLCC. I am pleased to briefly introduce our guest speaker, Sam Lehman. Sam is the co-founder of Columbia Consulting, which is both a certified LGBTBE and an NGLCC corporate partner. Sam has successfully navigated corporate procurement and has extensive experience in responding to RFIs, requests for information, and RFPs, requests for proposals. So throughout the next hour, Sam will lead us through some of the best practices of responding to RFIs and RFPs. We were able to incorporate many of the questions you asked ahead of time into this presentation. However, we will open it up for Q&A at the very end via the chat box. And again, it's that little bubble at the top that looks like a chat bubble that you can click on, and you can either ask a question to everyone or you can ask a question to the host. You may also email questions to supplierdiversity@nglcc.org at any point throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. So without further ado, Sam, we'll take it from here.
Okay, great. Brent, you can hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Brent. I have been a certified supplier for many years, and it has been a benefit. It's about half of my business at this point derives in some shape or form from supplier diversity, which originates with the NGLCC. So I'm pleased to be able to give back and help out as much as I can. And this topic specifically could be of general interest to everyone, but specifically it's for the chamber members that do business with other businesses. So for the folks who do business to the consumer, you'll find some interesting points here, but it's mainly geared towards companies that do business with other companies, so corp to corp. For the most part, how the process works is corporate America has the initial stage is called an RFI, and this is the precursor to an RFP. And an RFI is an opportunity where corporations send out a request for you to get a general idea of your organization. And in this request, you can be a bit creative because the questions aren't quite as analytical as the RFP. So it gives suppliers an opportunity to outline your company, your strengths. It gives you an opportunity to be creative in an overview of your operations and benefits, and you can include details which might be geared towards the background of the corporate member. So this is a great opportunity. An RFI is a great opportunity to be creative, and what this will do. This will go into the mix of who will get the RFP. So this is almost like the first stage of the acceptance portion. If the procurement department likes your RFI, then they will indeed put you on a list for the RFP. So, certainly first impressions are important. So this will, your creativity and structure will set the tone for the RFP and also your relationship with the client itself. So. Again, the very first step is when a corporation sends out an RFI, or request for information. If you make the cut and the corporation would like you to proceed forward, they will initiate an RFP, and that's a request for proposal. These typically are very analytical in nature. There's very few places on an RFP to be creative or to expand on answers. For the most part, in order to logically set up an RFP, it's as many yes and no and financial questions as possible. Therefore, it's not quite as subjective in the decision-making process. So you'll see that these are very analytical when you do RFPs. It's a very comprehensive tool, and also it will also give you an outline to maybe answer some questions that will specific to your client's needs. So if your client has a strong presence in the West Coast, knowing that ahead of time can give you the ability to gauge your answers. For the most part, after an RFP is put out and prior to submission, they give you 1 or 2 opportunities for question and answer sessions with the procurement department. So oftentimes, there might be some questions that appear gray to you, and you don't quite understand the basis of the question. So typically there's 1 or 2 Q&A sessions, very much like this, where quite a few suppliers will call up on a conference call and give the ability to ask questions prior to the submission of the proposal. Now, in order to have the RFPs, it's important to know the contacts and the players within the corporate America. All of us have supplier diversity partners in corporations, and these are the folks that really, they almost act as a liaison. They can provide guidance to us of what department to go to, what are the key players within the corporation, and if applicable, they could also provide contacts for us. So supplier diversity managers are really our first stepping stone to be able to get an RFP. Lots of times they will promote us within the company or suggest to procurement to include our companies on the RFP. So that's our first step, and it's a very important step to build a relationship with your supplier diversity manager. Within a company, there's about 3 or 4 types of contacts. There's also a sourcing representative. And what this is basically procurement. These are the folks who write the checks and to initiate the purchases throughout the company. They are really the final person between us and the RFP. So this will be our end-of-the-line contact. And this is typically, this introduction is made by the supplier diversity manager, and that's where a relationship would come from. Within a company, there's called MSPs, and what these are managed service providers, and these are typically third-party companies that will do the back work and initiate contracts, requisitions, and once you are established in a company, they will be the go-between between procurement and us. And these are typically third-party companies, and they are once we establish a relationship after the RFP, these are the day-to-day contacts that we'll be working with. And the last contact is sort of a team, and this would be an RFP committee. Typically, when RFPs are set up, the grading structure is done by a committee, and a lot of times what they will do, a company will pick maybe 6 or 7 representatives from a vast portion of the company, either managers, analytical folks within the company, creative folks in the company, and this will be a committee that will go through the proposal of the RFP from beginning to end. And this will be maybe a cross-reference of folks within the company. So those are our contacts within a corporation as a supplier diversity manager, as a sourcing representative, managed service provider, and the RFP committee, who would be blind to us. We would never meet them or have a contact with them, but they will indeed choose our fate at the end of the day. A couple of the questions was, is it smart to do a proposal template? Over the years, after doing quite a few proposals, I find that the question and answers are basically a cut and paste. So you'll see that if you have 10 RFPs, they're all basically the same. So when you do finally get an RFP, or those of you who have gotten one, it's best to just prepare a template based on that RFP. That way you can cut and paste your answers. along the way. Many of them will use the same generic questions, and of course you can change your answers specifically to that client, but for the most part, putting a template together would be the smartest and fastest way to respond to a proposal. Oftentimes proposals, the amount of time is between 30 and 60 days where a proposal is, RFP is put out and when it's due. But there are times when it could be, if you're added on late, it could be 10 days. So it's best to have a template prepared and ready to initiate. And you could also change it around depending on the client. One of the questions asked prior to this is there any type of advantage if you are first or last to respond to an RFP? So if there's a 30-day window to respond, is there any logic to time frame? And I found it to be that there is no logic to that. RFPs are typically collected. They're put on a desk or a shelf. And at that point, once the committee starts going through the responses, they're usually categorized alphabetically or by location. Very seldom have I ever spoke to committees that have gone through them in order of acceptance. So it doesn't make any sense early or late. Anytime during the response period should make no difference. Now, when we have contacts with companies and have a relationship with our diversity managers, the toughest problem facing us suppliers is how do I get into the engagements? How do I have the ability to respond to RFPs? RFPs are typically done and typically initiated every 3 years in corporate America, usually how long the contracts are. And this means that during that time, it's usually a locked list of prime suppliers. So although it'd be nice to say, can I start doing business with you next month? For the most part, you would be locked out during that period of time. That's why RFPs are so important. And it's so important to realize when they're coming out. So usually every 3 years, or sometimes every 2 years, companies will extend the RFPs to potential suppliers. But in between those times, you're pretty much locked out of doing business with those unless there are some circumstances of adding suppliers intermittently during the course of that time. Our number one resource, as I mentioned earlier, is our supplier diversity manager. They can not only act as a liaison, but also give you suggestions on who to speak to, when the last RFP was put out, and when potentially the new RFP is going to be initiated. Oftentimes, once you build a relationship, there can be a mentorship involved. And, they have a vested interest in putting on diversity suppliers and a vested interest at increasing diversity spend. So if you build a relationship and it's a solid one, it's to their benefit, and they will work as a mentor to you to push you through the chain of procurement and help you be on the list for the RFPs when they come out. Because the diversity manager is not your end client, to ask them specific questions like, will you put me on a list for an RFP? They really don't have the answer to that. So it's best to just ask for advice. What should my next steps be? What could I be doing differently? Who could I be speaking with? And that really ask for advice, because they don't have the authority typically to put you on the list for an RFP. But what they can do is advise us to who to speak with and also put in a good word for us. There are questions, if we're speaking to procurement or diversity representatives, there are some questions leading up to the RFP which can help you guide your answers. And, does your company engage with suppliers on a approved vendors list?
I was on the slide which has to do with leading questions to the decision makers. These are questions that you would want to ask prior to the engagement. And one of the questions is, very specific ones, do you engage with suppliers on an approved vendors list? And for the most part, about 70% of suppliers in the Fortune 500 world use approved vendors list, which means that you are available for requisitions for sales. If you're not on that list, typically you are shut out. So a leading question is, do you work from a list? If so, when is your RFP conducted, your next RFP, and what is the time frame of them? Are they 3-year RFPs or 2-year RFPs? And what is the time frame and when is the next one? So that could, you could put that in your tickler file and prepare yourself for each different company out there. Certainly, you would like to be included in how could they assist you with this. That would be a leading question. Prior to submitting the RFP, it's important to know who's making the decision and what is the time frame. So a typical question would be, is there going to be a committee set up for the RFP? Or is this done by yourself? Or is this done by procurement? And what is the process? So that could sort of guide you in your answers as well. If it's done by committee, typically they would be blind. And what a blind response is they would take all suppliers' names off of the RFPs and give you a coded number. So therefore, the committee would just make their selections blind and without company names on there. And that's about as least subjective as possible. Once you do have an opportunity, creating RFPs can be fairly difficult. The majority of the RFPs do give you one short example to elaborate on your company and be a bit creative, and this is typically called an executive summary. So most RFPs will say, give us a quick synopsis of your company and an executive summary, and you can be a bit creative. Here's where you can include your strengths. This will give you an opportunity to maybe expand on questions within the RFP and elaborate on them. And I gave an example here. Does supplier have warehouse in all the company's locations? While the supplier does not have specific warehouses in the company's location, supplier is part of a distributed or a network that gives the supplier the ability to reduce overhead, therefore reducing some costs. So what that means is on the RFP itself, it will say, do you have a location in this period? And you put an X, yes or no. Well, this will give you an example. If you feel that that's a big strength, you can expand on that in your executive summary. And obviously, I think you folks know this by now, there's a couple key points when elaborating on your business, the stability of your business. You can include your management structure, why your company structure is key to providing optimal turnaround time, if that's the case, and what differentiates your company. I said Smith Company. Supplier uses only recycled metals, thereby reducing production costs. Just using an example, but that could be an idea of what makes you different, and that is the ability, which I put it on the next slide. That's the ability to mention that in an executive summary. This is an executive summary that I just made up, threw together, called Smith Company, and this is a 2-page summary that offers key features, what makes you different, and a little bit about your organization. So that's an ability to look at what an executive summary may look like, and that is probably the only time that you will be able to elaborate and be creative when you put an RFP. When Brent had mentioned this to me earlier, he had put out some questions, and there were some various questions that came about, one of them being, if I'm a sole proprietor, how can I effectively partner with larger firms within the chamber responding to RFPs? Now, this is very good because when I respond to RFPs, I typically grab onto another supplier along the way to not only help my answers, but also be able to help a fellow certified supplier as well. By using my NGLCC, the NGLCC database as a resource, you could look up what different corporations that would fit into maybe a side-by-side area. So, for example, let's say that your organization provides corporate floor arrangements. You could look for other certified suppliers within the chamber that market office furniture. Therefore, if there are some proposals, you can have an add-on, say that, not only am I supply the office furniture, but for a certain fee, we could also bring floral arrangements to the party. And that's something that you could be creative within the chamber and start piggybacking on other suppliers and work as a tandem. About half of the RFPs in which we engage with, there is another certified supplier on with us, either next to us, above us, or we're piggybacking on them, or they're piggybacking on me. So it's a fantastic resource to sort of open up doors that might not have been open without the chamber. One of the other questions was government or commercial. What is the difference, and where should I focus? As you know, there's been great strides recently in the world of government resources. For years and years and years, the federal government did not recognize LGBT as a diversity, and now state by state they are. So we're now on the beginning stages working with Massachusetts as a company. They are reaching out to us. We're attempting to work with them. But this is all new, and it's fantastic. But for the most part, you'll find that the most applicable to RFPs are through the commercial environment. They usually have the most to gain. For the most part, because LGBT households have such unique discretionary spending, they find it that there's the ability for their gain as well. So in the commercial standpoint, you'll find that you'll receive many more RFPs, and also almost all Fortune 500 companies recognize LGBT as a diversity, and therefore will be involved in their goals. Many companies have 6, 7, 8, 10% of their spend earmarked to diversity, so that could be a big benefit, and we as a group would like as much of that as possible. Many of the RFPs outline insurance requirements and how can I afford this. That's probably one of the toughest hurdles when starting the RFP process if you've never done one. Once you establish a relationship with insurance carriers and you've paid the fees, all the RFPs and all the business afterwards will not be a high impact item for you, but initially it is. So let's just say that you have a very new RFP with high insurance regulations. When a RFP comes out, they'll set all the insurance regulations, all the detail of what needs to be in your portfolio, in your insurance portfolio, in order for you to do business with them. So you would simply go out and shop the insurance policies, have an idea of the price, and work that into your price. Therefore, it won't be quite as difficult and quite surprising. If you are not awarded the RFP, then you simply don't have to engage with the insurance company. But if you are awarded the RFP, at that point is when you would engage with the insurance company and purchase your coverage. And then going forward, almost every Fortune 500 company has very similar qualifications for insurance. So your first one will be very difficult financially, but any time after that shouldn't be too much of a burden. Another question was, we are a consulting firm which provides a very specific skill set. I haven't found an LGBTE certification, or I haven't found my LGBT certification to have an impact regarding engaging in an RFP. Well, this is interesting. So the NGLCC is basically a stepping stone. My NGLCC provides you with companies and contacts that will let you correspond with diversity managers. So if you have a specific skill set and there are needs out there, it's there. You just have to dig around. The best place to start with that is to go on to the resource guide at my NGLCC, look for your contacts within the corporate partners, and start maintaining a relationship, calling, emailing, mailing letters, whatever it would take to build a relationship. And usually within that company, somewhere within one branch of management will be the skill set that is needed. I mean, if there's a need for your skill set out there in corporate America, then our corporate members have the ability to engage in that as well. It just takes digging around. It just takes building relationships and asking questions and asking advice, and really just putting the effort into building the stepping stone to work with procurement and the management team within the companies. I realize this is a very brief overview, but potentially this should give you at least the steps from beginning to end, what an RFI is, what an RFP is, what questions to ask prior to and during the RFP, and the time frame in which RFPs are distributed, and the time frame once they are distributed when their decision-making process is going to be initiated. So I hope that you folks found some benefit from this, and might have answered some questions. And even senior and veteran companies out there that might have given them an example of something that they might have bypassed in the past.
All right. Well, thank you, Sam. At this point, we are going to open it up for Q&A. And again, if you could use that little chat function at the very top, if you wanted to ask the question at host, we will do our best to answer it, or you can email your question to supplierdiversity@nglcc.org. And Sam, I actually had a question for you. So since you've had quite a bit of experience in completing RFIs and RFPs, do you have a particular example or a particular tactic that has been successful for you when completing these? And likewise, do you have examples that maybe didn't work so well for you?
Well, it tends to be difficult because, as I mentioned, in RFIs, that gives you the example to expand on some potential RFP questions, and also gives you a chance to elaborate. And typically, what you can do is you can take RFP questions from your boilerplate and gear them into your RFI based on the company. So, unfortunately, there's not a lot of room to expand and to elaborate on RFPs. A lot of them are just yes and no and fill in the blank. Their goal is to be as least subjective as possible when putting the RFP to a committee. So the only way that you could use some tactics that could be an advantage is to study on the company itself. So if you realize that they're very strong on the West Coast, well, then you would gear your RFI questions to be West Coast centric. So I would just say, doing your homework with the company and finding out where they're strong and locations or needs and gearing your RFI. There's very little room to expand or to elaborate on RFPs, however.
Great, thank you. And what is the general timeline? How long does it take to complete an RFI or an RFP? A lot of times, folks are busy working within their business and completing what their business does very well. But in terms of budgeting out time, how long do you think someone should take to really do a nice, successful RFI or RFP?
Well, that's a good question, because one of the first responses that I hear from my fellow suppliers is, I just don't have the time. Let's just say, for an example, that you are successful on 2 of 10 RFPs. A lot of folks say, I just don't have the time to put into the 8 that aren't successful. I could be, I'm maybe not paying attention to other forms of my business. But I would say that that's typically not the case. Once you have a very good boilerplate that you could plug and play, it shouldn't take more than, I'd say, a solid maybe 5 days to complete an RFP from beginning to end, including the RFI. And that wouldn't be 8 hours a day, but I would probably say 3 solid hours for 5 days should give you the ability to do an RFP. Now, that is a big chunk of time, but the amount of the upside to being given the green light on an RFP is monumental.
Great. And let's say you were not awarded an RFP. Is it appropriate to ask the company, perhaps the RFP committee, why the contract was not awarded to you, to get better experience at next time?
Yeah, Most of you mentioned early in the process that if you aren't selected, they will give you feedback. However, I found that that's not, not quite as easy to do as it sounds. I have asked, say, if I would say 10 companies that I have not been successful, probably about 3 of them have actually offered me constructive feedback. The rest of them, the reasons why the feedback wasn't available is because they were chosen through committee, and it's difficult to get the committee members together for feedback. So if they're not just committee, it's rather easy, but they will give you the opportunity from time to time to have constructive feedback on why you weren't selected.
Great. Again, you can use the little chat feature to ask questions. We have one come in, Sam. So you had mentioned sometimes corporations will have a contract for at least 3 years, but an RFP will not open up, within those 3 years or for the duration of that contract. Is there anything that business can be doing in the meantime that might help them or might set them up for success when those RFPs do become available?
Yes, and I have done those. And what I would typically do is I would speak to, if I get the opportunity to speak to procurement and say that if your company works with requisitions, and I'm certainly not part of that process right now because I'm not on your approved vendors list, could you possibly do a mock situation where you release 3 requisitions to me without specific skill sets or names within your department, and allow me to respond to those requisitions as a mock setting to give you the ability to gauge what is my response time, what my pricing be, what is my reach as far as accessibility, whether it's a service or a product. And a lot of times they will allow you to respond to mock requisitions, and there have been times where because my mock answers were appropriate to them, that they have added me as a supplier in mid-RFP. So typically, in strange situations, can add suppliers in the middle of an RFP or in the middle of the engagement period, a 3-year engagement period. And one of the ways I found successful is asking them to allow me to respond to requisitions in a mock setting. And it makes you look like you're hungry for business and you're willing to put the time in, knowing that you're not going to have any reward right away. But I think they find it, they like the hunger of that scenario.
Excellent. Somebody else asked a question. As you yourself as a corporate partner, if you put out an RFP, what would you be looking for? Is there anything specific? Are you looking for creativity, or would you like to look, are you looking for specifically what you ask, no more, no less?
Well, certainly, it varies. I mean, as we all know, all our different suppliers come in all shapes or sizes. My company happens to be service related. Other companies are product driven. So, that's really very specific. For instance, I'm in technology, so if I were to do an RFP, it would be very focused on skill sets and very focused on accessibility to talent. So it would be less price and more, talent and technology driven, where there are some RFPs where if you're providing industrial carpet, it might be very important to be, price conscious. So I would say for competitive products, price would be higher up on the list. But for service organizations, I think accessibility and turnaround time and other things would trump the price point.
Great, thank you. Someone just asked if you could maybe speak to working as a prime, working with subprimes or subcontractors.
Yes, yeah. Now, how that would work, there's 2 ways. One of them is, okay, let's say, for instance, my company, I'm a supplier of technology. So I would help companies with specific technology skill sets that they may not have within their organization. But they're also looking for hardware as well. Now, because I'm not a hardware company, what I would do, I would go onto my NGLCC and investigate my fellow suppliers in the hardware business, and then engage with them of piggybacking with me on the RFP. So if you have a product that you feel you could piggyback with, then you would go onto my NGLCC and maybe contact your fellow suppliers, because there's many of us out there, and ask if an appropriate RFP or if an appropriate requisition comes your way, you feel would be a good add-on fit that could help you win business, then I would like to engage with you. So for the most part, I'm asking other suppliers to help me, but there have been times when suppliers have called me for the same reason. So there's selfish reasons, and then there's being a service reasons. The selfish reason is I think that another certified supplier can help me win the bid, and also you're doing a good deed because you're being of service to the NGLCC.
Great, thank you for that. And just to remind folks, there are a number of different ways that you can be given an RFP or be considered for an RFP. Sometimes oftentimes our corporate partners do go into my NGLCC. If they have a particular need or upcoming opportunity, they'll go into my NGLCC and they will search for that specific need commodity. They might be using keywords, they might be using NASC codes or the UNFPSC codes. These are all codes specific to different industries, and sometimes the codes themselves can be quite specific, but they might pull lists that way. They do oftentimes reach out to us here at the NGLCC and ask if we can send them a list of businesses that meet their upcoming needs, and sometimes they might send us very specific requirements for the RFP. We actually had one yesterday, one today, which is not uncommon at all. A lot of times they're not public, and so it's not something that we can necessarily let you know ahead of time, but that's one way. That's another way that you can be sent an RFP. Going to your supplier diversity managers at these corporations, if you know that you really want to work with a particular corporation, you have the ability to access the supplier diversity managers at that corporation. There are people with whom we develop strong relationships, and these are people who have a vested interest in getting their procurement departments to use certified suppliers. It increases their spend that they have with suppliers, so there's that initiative as well. And obviously they're in the line of work, really what they're doing, but these people are not, these supplier diversity managers are not outright procurement folks, but they can connect you with different departments, and those departments know of particular opportunities and RFP opportunities. So it's entirely appropriate to ask the supplier diversity managers at these companies to be connected with these different departments. Maybe Sam would like to be connected with an IT department. It makes no sense for him. It really depends, but it's entirely appropriate to be connected to those departments and then ask about upcoming opportunities. So that's another way that these RFPs can come to you. I think that's it for questions, unless anybody has any else. Sam, did you have any last remarks or comments?
No, that was a perfect ending, because once you build a relationship with the supplier diversity manager, and they feel comfortable with you, they could push you up the food chain. But it's important that they feel comfortable with you at first, and that's how it really all begins.
All right, sounds great. Well, if any other questions do come in, I'll connect with Sam and we'll do our best to answer them. This will be available to you online. We do house our past webinars online. They're embedded in YouTube, but they're available to you to view at your leisure. But at this point, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us, and Sam, a big thank you to you as well. We really appreciated your very insightful knowledge on RFIs and RFPs and the do's and don'ts.
Sure, and I could have not only could I have this available, but I could have an example of the executive summary, and I could also have a mock RFP if anyone would like to see one. It would be more specific to service industry, but nevertheless, I have one available.
Great, thank you, Sam. And thanks again, everyone.